Next up, we have Robert Hale. Robert Hale lives in the Como area and grows vegetables. After he washes his hands, he writes about local history and plays the violin. He is the author of Frogtown Baden, the story of his immigrant ancestors who settled in the Frogtown district. Please welcome Robert.
Thank you, you're all too kind. I'll give you a little background to this story I wrote. It's about my great uncle, who was a bootlegger during Prohibition, and he was beaten to death by the federal agents for not talking when they interviewed him. And I always heard this story growing up from my relatives, but so I went and did some research, and I found all the newspaper articles from that day. And he had made the headlines, along with the Winter Carnival Queen candidate. So this is the story of Frank. It's called Frankie Rides the Clipper. As was its custom, the Alberta Clipper rode into town on a carpet of warm Pacific air, dropped a couple inches of fluffy white, and headed south. Nipping at its heels was a howling Canadian wind, so dense and frigid that even the windows shivered in their frames, loud enough to rattle Frank out of his coma. Frank Rothbauer, an unemployed 28-year-old, would have loved seeing his story in bold headlines at the front page of the St. Paul Daily News, sharing the spotlight with the smiling photos of the Winter Carnival Queen candidate. That was Frank. As were so many of his age, Frank was enchanted by the glitz, the glamour, and the lifestyle of the gangsters of the era. In his pursuit of the dream, he obtained a tenuous, low-level position managing a soda shop, in reality a front for illegal liquor distribution. But peer way down between the fuzzy lines of official denials, and there you'd read Frank's tale. One of an unfortunate individual caught up in a great American experiment known as Prohibition. The drives, the popular name given to the federal agents, charged with ferreting out illegal sales of alcohol, raided Frank's Frogtown soda shop that Sunday morning, intending to nab a big-time bootlegger. If Frank hadn't sampled his own product before breakfast, he may have had the clarity to recall that what the feds really wanted was the owner's name, or at least a payoff. He might also have wiped the cockeyed grin off his face that his assailants interpreted as a defiant smirk. After refusing their demands, he was knocked around the soda bar, thrown to the floor, almost taking out a couple of frightened patrons with him. Frank's last conscious thought that day was probably to wonder where that dry got the money to buy those brand new red wing boots with the deep snowy tread that were coming down on him. Dazed and in cuffs, Frank was led across the intersection of Thomas and Dale, just a half block from home, in full view of the neighbors, to a waiting Ford Model A, and taken to downtown to jail. Later that day, he was moved to Anchor Hospital after he began to convulse in his cell. As in a nightmare, Frank thrashed about in his restraints as the wind rattled and howled like wolves at the windows, all while mumbling, "Stop beating me, stop beating me," as his sister Anne held his hand and tried to soothe his swollen brain. The doctors proclaimed his injuries fatal, and so 2 days later they were. With the passing of the Clipper, the winds died down enough for a good crowd of friends to caravan from the Church of St. Agnes across the Dale Street Bridge to the Calvary Cemetery. The cases referred to the coroner, who reported he could not definitively determine the cause of his injuries. Public outrage at the case waned as the official investigation was shuffled between departments, and within a month, Frank's story had drifted to the far pages and languished among the classifieds, leaving only his family's voice demanding justice. Months later, after the Alberta Clippers had retreated, the stock market crashed, and Frank's story was buried in the avalanche of the Great Depression.